We are less than a week away from pitchers and catchers reporting to Goodyear. So the offseason is not quite over, but it's starting to get there. Where do the Guardians stand in the AL Central? Will they be able to defend their division crown? We'll take a look around the AL Central on today's Locked On Guardians.
Tanner Bobby of the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, welcome on into today's episode of Locked On Guardians. Today we're going to be taking a look at the state of the AL Central. We'll look at what the other teams in the division have done this offseason compared to the Guardians, and if they're still in shape to defend their AL Central crown in 2025. Take a look at who their top challengers might be. We'll talk about projection systems, whether or not they like the Guardians. We'll also address the Guardians' recent minor league signings as well. And we did hear another Guardians player on a podcast who thinks more moves are coming. We'll talk about what that might be at the end of today's episode. Before we get started, we know it is almost here. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Justin Latta, your host of today's episode, and I have been covering the Guardians minor league system all the way back since 2007. What a great year that was, too. Guardians won the division that year. The Indians, at the time, won the division that year. Terrible farm system. But they were coming off a pretty lousy year the year before, where they should have competed, following up on a good 2005 season, but very lousy farm system. I was the editor-in-chief of Guardians Baseball Insider at one time. Currently at Prospects Live, the News Herald, the Morning Journal, and as well as my own newsletter, nextyearincleveland.substack.com. Would love for you to subscribe over there. I've got my prospect rankings and reports coming soon. I've got a little ebook coming out, too, that's going to have all that stuff in it. So going to want to subscribe over there if you want some detailed Guardians prospect content over there. Before we get into the bulk of today's show, join us to be an insider with Locked On Guardians. There's all kinds of cool benefits. Some of the stuff today that we're going to talk about on today's show, I've already had some chats with over on the Insider program with our fans. We talked about the two minor league signings that have happened, some projection systems, Stephen Kwan's comments on Corey Kluber's podcast, which we'll address. We're having those conversations over there. Last weekend, we had a subscriber-only video chat. We just kind of had a nice 2-hour chat with a bunch of fans. Talking baseball, talking Guardians, inside stories, all that kind of fun stuff. And, we're putting out bonus episodes. Once a month, we're doing a leftover series of Guardians / MLB topics we don't get to. We're doing subscriber-only mailbags once a month as well. Other bonus videos, written content as well. So if you want access to all that, join us to be an insider and have those fun conversations with us. Super close to being at 4K on YouTube. We'd love to get to the 4K mark before spring training. Ideally before the season starts. I think we're less than 200 away now. So tell a friend, have them sign up on YouTube and hit the button and make sure they get all the episodes. All right, let's talk today about who can take the Guardians AL Central crown from them. The Guardians were not expected to win the division a year ago. It was expected to be the Twins, right? We all thought the Twins were going to win the division a year ago, and most of the projection systems thought so too. We'll get to that later in today's episode. But it was the Guardians who were able to drag a terrible rotation for most of the year, really all of the year. Had Shane Bieber for 2 great starts. Tanner Bybee was good. Ben Lively, saved their bacon a little bit. And then everybody else was just kind of mishmash until Matt Boyd was good at the end of the year. And the bullpen and the first half offense dragged them to a division title. The second half offense was, not as great, obviously, but it was the bullpen that dragged them to that division title in the second half after the offense started to regress a little bit. We'll talk about what the Guardians did or didn't do to address any of those needs this offseason, but let's talk about who can challenge the Guardians first in the AL Central. Before we get started, the Chicago White Sox, they've already been eliminated from the AL Central race. Whenever the season starts, you can just go ahead and put it up. Their season's over. They went out and they traded Garrett Crochet, and they didn't really add anybody. The White Sox, for what it's worth, their offseason moves reflected a team of what they should be doing. They added a bunch of dudes that they could flip at the deadline, right? They added Mike Tauchman, who I wanted the Guardians to sign to help them out. They could flip him. Maybe the Guardians will pick him up, although if they do, I've got some serious questions at that point. They signed Martin Perez. They signed our old friend James Karinchak. All moves that, if they pan out, can net them something at the deadline. That's what they were doing. And I like the return they got for Garrett Crochet. They let Yohan Moncada go, who's still a free agent, obviously. Super weird offseason for the White Sox. They're going to be worse. They're going to be worse somehow. They were the worst team in baseball a year ago. They're probably going to be worse. The question for the Guardians, though, is can they fix the White Sox problem? That was the thing that the Guardians had an issue with last year. Remember, up until the last month of the season, if you'll remember, the Guardians were 5-5 against the White Sox, and it took a 3-game sweep in September to get them to the 8-5 mark against the White Sox and take 8 of the 13 games they played against them. But up until September, they were 5-5 against the White Sox, the worst team in baseball. That could have really cost the Guardians. They had a 15-10 September, so those 3 wins were pretty important, obviously. But they probably need to fix that this season. And they don't have Josh Naylor, the White Sox killer, this year, so someone else is going to have to step up and have a good season against the White Sox. They were good against other AL Central opponents. They dominated the Twins, right? We'll talk about the Twins a little bit. Struggled against the Royals. The Tigers were a tight battle last year. But I think first and foremost, no matter how bad the White Sox are, the Guardians got to fix that problem. There's always that one team every year that you struggle with that you shouldn't, and the White Sox were there for the Guardians last year. So the White Sox are already mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but the Guardians need to be on guard against the White Sox and not let that trip them up this year. Let's talk about the Twins. The Twins also had not a real ideal offseason, if we're being honest. I think we don't really love necessarily the Guardians didn't add anything this offseason. Like, the offense is probably maybe at best the same, if not maybe a little worse. You kind of have to squint and hope for some things for them to be better. That's not to say it can't happen, but a lot of things have to go right for them to be better. Or I should say a lot of things have to pan out in terms of young players. So there's no guarantees there. The Twins did even less. Like, they signed their first major league free agent of the offseason on Tuesday, a 35-year-old left-handed reliever, Danny Colombe. That was their first major league free agent all offseason that they have signed. They didn't trade anybody of consequence. They didn't trade for anybody of consequence. They let Kyle Farmer go. They let Manuel Margot go, who wasn't that great last year. They lost Carlos Santana. All their minor league deals were nobodies, right? It was Huascar Yanoa, Mike Ford, like Anthony Misavage. This is their best signing, was Danny Colombe. So the Twins this year, coming into 2025, they are banking on health, right? That's what they're banking on. They're banking on, which I feel like they've been doing for the last couple of years. They were banking on health. And the Twins roster is really good. There's a reason that they were projected to win the AL Central last year in a lot of places, and they're projected to do it again this year. Because Carlos Correa, great talent. Byron Buxton, great talent. Royce Lewis, great talent. All 3 really good players, all guys who just cannot stay healthy. I got into a little hot water on some social media sites last year about Royce Lewis talking about how he was coming for the Guardians and he doesn't like them, and then things will even out for them, and then he got hurt. And I was like, well, about that. And Twins fans didn't like that. They thought I was cheering for the Royce Lewis injury. I was not cheering for Royce Lewis to get hurt. He's a fun player. And I enjoy the little back and forth. I think it's fun for the fans and the teams to have a little emotion against each other. It makes things more fun. So not rooting for Royce Lewis to get hurt. He's a good talent. I just thought it was interesting that he made those comments, and then not more than a couple of days later, he's back on the injured list. But those are talented players. Carlos Correa continues to have plantar fasciitis issues. Byron Buxton has an everything issue. Royce Lewis continues to get hurt. So they're banking on all 3 of those guys playing like 120, 140 games. And for Byron Buxton, that's happened just like once or twice. Royce Lewis, not quite old enough for that yet. Carlos Correa has missed good portions of the last 2 years. Still a good player. And around them, they had some positive developments a year ago, right? Like Trevor Larnach's a good hitter. Matt Wallner really turned into a good hitter. Jeff and I both really liked Brooks Lee in the draft a couple years ago, and they've got an interesting bench, right? They've got Edouard Julian, who I think is a good player, had a down year a year ago. Ryan Jeffers has some power. It's a good team. And as far as the rotation goes, I think the Guardians might have lucked out last year. holding the Twins off because of the rotation, because Pablo Lopez was not as good as I think he could have been, and maybe there's a reason for that, but Joe Ryan missed the end of the season right there with some injury issues. He's really good. Bailey Ober's been really good. The back of the rotation's not great. It's Simeon Woods Richardson, who's solid, but nothing special, who could maybe take a step forward, and Chris Paddock, who just, you can't really count on for anything. And they don't really have any depth at starting pitcher either, I don't think. They've got Zebby Matthews, who's been a good prospect. Maybe he'll turn into something a little more. Louis Varland, they've tried as a starter, hasn't quite worked. David Festa, they're trying to work in things. Matt Cantorino has been hurt a little bit. They've got some depth. I shouldn't say have no depth. They have some depth. And their bullpen is up and down. Like, they had a weird season from Johan Duran a year ago. I still think the Guardians bullpen over anybody in this division, I'll be honest with you, especially over the Twins. I think what's really carrying the Twins going into the season, going into spring training, is a lot of people think they're going to be, they're banking on health, but they've got they've got some guys around them. Like I said, it's not just a big three. I think Matt Wallner was a big emergence for them a year ago. And if their top three is healthy in the rotation, they're going to be really a force to deal with. So if the Twins stay healthy, it feels like we say this every year, if the Twins stay healthy, they're going to be a good team. There's a reason why projection systems like them, and I can see why. All right, we got two more AL Central teams to talk about and how the Guardians stack up against them. Going into spring training, we've also got some projection systems to talk about, and we've got some possible comments coming from a player about more moves being made for the Guardians. If that's true or not, we will address what that might look like on the rest of today's Locked On Guardians. The big game, it's almost here. It's exciting. No better way to make it more exciting with PrizePicks. It is the best place for daily fantasy sports. They got over 10 million users playing, and there's billions being awarded. PrizePicks really does make it fun to get on the action, and here's how it works. All you got to do is pick more or less on two-player projections. If you're right, you can win up to $100 in 100 times your cash. PrizePicks actually really has this cool thing where you have a free pick for the big game. So you can take Patrick Mahomes, and he only needs to throw 1 yard to win. You pair that with one more correct pick, guess what? You're a winner on PrizePicks. Super cool. I know one of the things I would be doing on PrizePicks for the Super Bowl too is the big game is Travis Kelce. Receiving yards, selecting more for quarterbacks' passing yards, and the other good thing too on PrizePicks you can really feel confident about when you're playing is the fast, safe withdrawal. So when you win, the cash is in your account in as little as 15 minutes. And of course, they have the promos tab too. So any of the super sweet Millie winners, big game lineups, if you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. So download the app today. Use our code LOCKEDONLB. Get 50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. So that is code LOCKEDONLB, $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup from PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you all for tuning in to today's show. If you've gotten this far and you're not a subscriber, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Don't miss a video on YouTube. Set the automatic download on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Set the auto download so you always get it. Helps us out and helps you never miss an episode. And if you're this far into the episode too, tell a friend. If you enjoy the content Jeff and I are doing here, we're almost 5 days a week. We're not quite 5 days a week yet. We will be next week, but we're the only place covering the Guardians every day. We get into nuanced conversation about all the things that happen with the Guardians. We're going to be talking about 2 minor league signings today that, at the end of the day, might not be a big deal, but we'll talk about why they matter and what the Guardians could be thinking as well. We cover pretty much every angle of this team. So if you want daily baseball content, daily Cleveland Guardians baseball content, this is the place to get it 5 days a week. Cleveland Guardians, your team, every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, let's talk about the Royals. The biggest issue for the Royals a year ago was their bullpen, right? They kind of had some weird offensive pieces, I think, too. Like Adam Frazier was around a lot last year, and he wasn't really good. Michael Garcia was leading off, probably not the ideal fit for that. They had some weird things going on in their offense last year. I mean, MJ Melendez was horrendous most of the year. Even though I think he could be a good player, he was not very good. He's out of position. But they've got a really good middle of the order, right? They've got Bobby Witt, Vinny Pasquantino, and Salvador Perez. Really good middle of the order. Really good. Last year, though, their problem was their bullpen, right? John Schreiber was not all that good. He was hurt. a little bit. Angel Zerpa was not that good. Chris Stratton wasn't that good. Sam Long eventually was good. They had a lot of guys in and out of that bullpen a year ago that just really, James MacArthur was going to be their closer. He really struggled, so they really had to address that bullpen, and they kind of did, right? They did trade for Lucas Ursig at the deadline for almost nothing, which was a great move by them. He'll be back this year. I have a lot of confidence in him. He's going to be tough. They did acquire Hunter Harvey. He's solid. They got the rest of the guys back, and then they went out and signed Carlos Estevez, who I really like too, and I think he'll be a good addition for them too. So I think the Royals bullpen will be better in 2025. I don't know if it's great. Again, I'm still taking the Guardians bullpen by far by anyone in this division, but I think the Royals bullpen will be improved. I think the real question for the Royals is their starting pitching going to carry them again this year? That was the thing that carried them a year ago. They had one of the best rotations in baseball, right? Cole Ragans, Cy Young Award finalist. I think Seth Lugo came close or should have been. Waka was good. They re-signed him. After that, it kind of a mess in the rotation, honestly. Like Alec Marsh had his good days and bad days. I think he'll still be solid. They ended up trading Brady Singer this offseason, who was good for them. They ended up getting Jonathan India, who, if you look at Jonathan India, who looks like he's going to DH as of right now, definitely an upgrade over Adam Frazier. Definitely an upgrade. Does he make the team better than just having Brady Singer? Yeah, maybe. But, you got to be really counting on Chris Bubic and Alec Marsh take steps forward. Michael Lorenzen was okay for them a year ago. I don't know if he's a dude, that is super solid. He's super solid. Does he really put you over the top? I don't know. I think it's more of a depth kind of thing. And then the Royals, as far as depth is concerned, they don't have a lot of depth, I think, in terms of the rotation or offensively, honestly. I do like their farm system, I will say. I don't know if Nick Pratto has figured things out yet, but there's Jack Caglione, who we've talked about a lot on this show. Blake Mitchell had a great year a year ago. Carter Jensen's really good. They got some dudes in that system they can either trade or can pull up this year, I think. So the Royals are going to be tougher. I'm taking their lineup of the Guardians. Obviously, when you have Bobby Witt, Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez, really, really good lineup. The rotation's really good. It's a lot more proven. So I'd probably take the Royals rotation over the Guardians too, because Cole Ragans and Seth Lugo are pretty much sure bets, as long as they're healthy. Waka has been solid throughout his career, and he was really good a year ago, so I'll take him too. I just think there's more certainty in the Royals rotation. The bullpen definitely has improved again over a year ago, but I'd still hit the Guardians bullpen there. But the Royals are definitely a threat to the Guardians, I think. And so are the Twins from before. Both those teams are threats because the Twins just got to stay healthy in theory, and they might have some depth, but their best players got to stay healthy. That's the thing. And they don't have anybody to replace those guys. Not that anybody does have players to replace guys like Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton or Royce Lewis. They're just really good. You don't replace those dudes. You hope to get by when they're hurt. But those guys are stars. The Guardians, kind of lack that. So both the Twins and Royals are threats to take the crown from the Guardians in 2025. The team I haven't talked about, though, that I really think might surprise some people in terms of how serious I took them, and maybe it's because they made the playoffs a year ago, but I think the Tigers, to me, I think are the biggest threat to the Guardians this offseason. They've had a good offseason, right? They've signed Gleyber Torres, who was a thorn in the Guardians' side in the playoffs, and he's got a 1-year deal. I don't know how good he's going to be, but I think he's definitely an upgrade for them. And they've got a good middle of the order too, right? They've got Riley Green, who was good a year ago. Kerry Carpenter has been good for them when he's healthy. Colt Keith kind of up and down last year. Matt Verling solid. The rotation, though, for them is kind of where it's at. Tarek Skubal, obviously, Cy Young Award winner, back this year. Going to be good. I can bank on that, I think. Jack Flaherty, they just re-signed Jack Flaherty. Great year a year ago. Very tough on the Guardians. Obviously, a World Series win at the Detroit, even though he kind of struggled in the World Series. They just re-signed him to a very expensive deal. $25 million for a year is definitely a lot for Jack Flaherty if you think about it. They're spending $25 million on Jack Flaherty this year and $16 million on Alex Cobb. That is insane to me that they are spending that much money on Alex Cobb. But Reese Olson, pretty good. Casey Mize, I think they're still waiting to see what can happen from him. Amazing to me that Reese Olson is going to be probably a more sure bet in the Tigers rotation than Casey Mize, but here we are. I think the biggest thing for the Tigers, though, is this, and it's the same thing the problem the Guardians have. It's bullpen regression. It's bullpen regression, right? The Tigers were really good in the bullpen in the second half. That's what propelled them to the playoffs. That's what got them to face Cleveland, right? It was Tarek Skubal, 5 and fly from Reese Olson. They'll throw in Keeter Montero. They had some guys hurt. Reese Olson would have probably pitched more if he wasn't hurt. But it was that bullpen, right? It was Tyler Holton who got some down ballot Cy Young votes. It was Bo Brisky who was really good, and Will Vest who was really good. Brant Herter and Jason Foley at the end. Like, those dudes all stepped up. Are they all going to be that good again this year? Foley's 29, Brisky's 26, Holton's 28. These are guys that weren't high pedigree players. They were waiver claims and non-drafted free agents and late draft picks. Like, these guys aren't guys that they were really developing as major contributors. That's generally how it works in the bullpen anyway, right? You're not really drafting high picks for relievers. Like, outside of Andrew Walters, you're getting more Manuel Clases and Cade Smith's undrafted free agents. But those guys have kind of had their time along baseball, and it took them a while to break out. They got 35-year-old Tommy Kahnle, who was obviously a pain for the Guardians in the playoffs of the Yankees. That'll help them out a lot, too. This bullpen's still really good, but they have the same problem the Guardians could have, and it's regression. They were really good in the second half. It got them into the playoffs. Is it going to be as good this year? I doubt it. That doesn't mean it won't be good. It just means they won't be as good as a year ago because how it was. I will say this, too, for the Tigers. Their starting rotation has depth. They got Jack Flaherty. It's a great 1-2 punch between Skubal and Flaherty. I think Olson, I've liked Olson for a long time, so I like that guy in the rotation. Mize and Cobb, hard to say with where they've been, but they got Jackson Jobe coming, who now they don't have to put in the rotation to start the year. He can go to AAA, get some things worked out. Ty Madden, I've liked him going back to the draft. I think he can be a serviceable option for them. Keeter Montero, I've liked him for a while too. We've saw what he can do. I think he can be a serviceable option for them. Obviously, I love Matt Manning. I'm not buying Matt Manning myself right now, but he's depth, which is good. They've got depth there. They got Alex Lange in AAA for relievers, and Brennan Hannafy, who was good for them last year too. So this team's got pitching depth. I think for the Tigers, though, they have some questions on offense. We'll talk about how that all stacks up against the Guardians. We'll talk about some podcast comments from Stephen Kwan, and we will talk about some of the minor league signings for the Guardians they just made, all to finish up today's Locked On Guardians. All right, if you want to hang out and go to some cool events, I know, the NFL playoffs, they're fun. All playoff games are really fun, right? We love going to playoff games. We love going to live events, especially in Cleveland. The Super Bowl should be a lot of fun. I know the NFL playoffs have been a lot of fun. If you are looking for a deal on any game that's coming up, I know the Cavs just lost to the Celtics. That stinks. Still a hot ticket. A lot of things going on right now. The NCAA tournament's not far off. We're about a month away from conference games and college basketball. And I know those tickets are already on Gametime. They've got that feature called Gametime Picks we always talk about. And it really tells you what the best market deal is. It tells you if you're in the top 5% for this deal based on market factors and the price for this game or this event you want to go to. It shows you the best deals, so you're not wasting all kinds of time. I use Gametime Picks all the time to go to comedy events, theater, concerts, sporting events. I've used Gametime all the time, and it really helps you find great seats. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase with Gametime, so terms apply. But create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB to get $20 off your first purchase on Gametime. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I think the biggest question for the Tigers, we're talking about the state of the AL Central here. I think the biggest question for the Tigers is development going to be linear? And again, that's why I think the Tigers and the Guardians have the same kind of path here. The Tigers got in the playoffs a year ago. 3 AL Central teams got in the playoffs a year ago. We've seen the Guardians in 2023 took that step forward that we weren't expecting, right? They were, quote unquote, ahead of schedule. And the Tigers last year, they were sellers at the deadline. They traded Jack Flaherty. They didn't really add anything. And they went on a run. And they made the playoffs. They beat the Astros in the first round. They took the Guardians to get 5 games in the ALDS. It was a fun series. They've got a good young team. I think the question, though, is development going to be linear for them? Because we know in baseball it's not always linear, right? The Guardians did not make the playoffs in 2023. They didn't make the playoffs 2020 and 2006, like I said at the top of the show. Development is not always linear. They're going to have some hangover, too, from the playoffs. Remember, they played the max. They played 7 playoff games. That's new for a lot of their players, right? Parker Meadows had to be sent to AAA a year ago. He came back in the second half, was a little better. Riley Green's going to his 4th year. Colt Keith's going to go into his 2nd year. He struggled at times last year. They're handing third base over to Jace Young, who I like, but he's a rookie. Jake Rogers and Trey Sweeney, not much hitters. They're there for their defense. You can't guarantee the Tigers are going to just all of a sudden take that leap the next year, because that doesn't always happen in baseball. A lot of teams who you think just build off of a great year and turn into something next year, it doesn't always happen that way. And like I said, the Tigers had a good offseason, right? They added Gleyber Torres, who I like. They added Jack Flaherty back to their team. They signed Tommy Kahnle. They had a good offseason. But having a good offseason doesn't always mean you're going to have a good season. You can't win the offseason. You got to win the actual games. How many times in the past did we hear the White Sox win the offseason? They didn't win anything. So there's no guarantees. The Tigers and the Guardians are in very similar paths to me. I do view the Tigers, I think, as if the Twins are healthy, they're the biggest challengers for the Guardians. But the health uncertainty to me is such a big factor for them, and I think they lack depth. The Tigers, to me, have more depth, and I think there's more certainty in their health, too. So the Tigers and Twins, if I had to rank the teams, I'm not saying the Guardians are favorites, they shouldn't be, but if I had to say, like, who am I ranking the AL Central right now, I think I'm going Tigers, Twins, Guardians, Royals. Like, it's kind of where I'm at right now. The Guardians pitching staff got better over the offseason. They definitely did. Is it the best in AL Central? Probably not. It's not, because they don't have a Tarek Skubal. They don't have, I guess they have a Pablo Lopez. I think Tanner and Pablo Lopez are on similar standing there. Joe Ryan's really good. The Guardians don't really have a Joe Ryan. It could be Gavin Williams, right? The bullpen is still the bullpen, and I think even with regression for the Guardians, their bullpen's still the best in the division. Doesn't mean it'll be the best in terms of all of baseball, or it's going to be just so good that no one can keep up. Like, I think we've talked about it. There's going to be regression for the bullpen no matter what, and they could still be a good bullpen and still not be as good as they were a year ago. But I do believe in Tanner Bybee. I did say I believe in Luis Ortiz. And after that, though, it's a big question mark. And even then, as much as I like Luis Ortiz, there's no guarantees there either. Like, he's not done this for multiple years the way Seth Lugo has, or Tarek Skubal, or I know Jack Flaherty has had one good year, but you know what I'm saying? Like, he doesn't have the track record yet. So even being optimistic about Luis Ortiz, I don't think you can sit there and say track record wise, this is a guy you can count on. It's Tanner Bybee. It's a lot of guys up in the air. I think the rotation's deeper and more talented, but they've got to prove it first. It's a lot up in the air. You don't know if Ben Lively can repeat what he did a year ago. Gavin Williams is a wild card. Tristan McKenzie's a wild card. Logan Allen, Joey Cantillo, all wild cards. The bullpen I don't think is a wild card, but the rotation is, besides Tanner. Even though you're optimistic about some of these guys, it's hard to sit here and say with any confidence you can tell how they're going to go. The lineup, is it any worse? I don't know if it's any worse. Carlos Santana is not going to hit for as much power as Josh Naylor. Let's remember Josh Naylor did struggle at the end of the year last year, where Carlos Santana got better, which is stunning given their age difference. A full season of Kyle Manzardo with no platoon, going to come with risks. I think there's going to be some growing pains there. I've said before, Lane Thomas in a contract year, maybe that's a good thing. Would love to see them give an honest shot to Chase DeLauder to make the lineup a little bit deeper. Juan Brito, we'll see. I still think the Guardians bullpen stacks up. The offense can be there. I just think you have to do a lot of hope and wish on the Guardians offense. It could happen, but even being that optimistic, there's not a lot of certainty there. So the Guardians, as far as I'm concerned, they stack up really well with the bullpen. The rotation, they're definitely behind the Twins. They're definitely behind the Royals. They're definitely behind the Tigers. Even being optimistic, they're still behind the Tigers. So they're still the fourth best rotation in the division as a whole. Offensively, I could see them being on par with the Twins, or not the Twins, the Royals. Maybe a little bit worse. I don't know. They're still probably third in the division offensively, I think. Biggest thing. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. I think it's a wide open division. The projections certainly agree with that. The projections definitely don't like the Guardians to win the AL Central. So Pagoda from Baseball Prospectus came out this week, and Pagoda's most likely projection for the Guardians is 80 and 81. And the thing to remember about Pagoda and projections is it's not they're projecting actual wins. They are predicting outcomes. It's a range of outcomes. So they are saying that when they simulate things thousands of times, the estimated range for the Guardians generally falls in 80 wins. They're not saying they're going to win 80 games. They're saying that is the most commonly generated outcome for them is 80 wins. The Twins, the most commonly generated outcome for them, the highest probability outcome for them is 86 wins. So this division's wide open. Kansas City's there. They actually like the Tigers less. It's 79 wins on average. So the division's wide open. Of course, the White Sox, are projected to lose 100. The only ones in the American League who are thought up to lose 100 games. They're terrible. This division's wide open, and it's important to remember, too, a year ago, Pagoda also thought the Guardians' most likely outcome was 83 wins. I thought it was 88. And they surprised us all. So projection systems generally, this is what the projection systems think can account for. Back in like 2015, 2016, 2014, they didn't see the Royals coming. Nobody did. And I think some of that had to do with bullpen because bullpens are hard to predict. Nobody predicted the Guardians bullpen would be that good a year ago. And you can predict that they will probably not be as good as they were a year ago and still be pretty good. But it's hard to factor those things in. So I think that's a big part of that here too. Let's discuss a couple of the minor league signings for the Guardians. So, if you haven't heard, Colby Allard and Vince Velasquez are coming to Guardian spring training on minor league deals, both non-roster invitees to Major League Camp. Colby Allard, 10 years ago now, was a top prospect of the Braves. I mean, he was as high as top 5 for them. Everybody liked Colby Allard. Mid-90s fastball, big curveball, big spin, deception guy, strike thrower, good athlete. People really, really liked him. He was a UCLA commit, really high up on their prospect list back at the time. People thought he was going to be a number 2 starter, number 3 starter. He was in the same class as Dylan Cease and Lucas Giolito. Everybody thought he was going to be good, and he never panned out. Things never worked out for Colby Allard. He hasn't always been healthy. He just never got it together. He actually started against the Guardians last year for the Phillies. I don't look at Colby Allard really as anything that is going to impact the Guardians this year. I think it's a AAA depth signing. Maybe he has a good spring and he opts out and goes somewhere else. Maybe he goes to AAA. The important thing is to remember that guys get hurt in spring training. You need a lot of innings covered. You need a lot of AAA innings covered. So that to me is where Colby Allard is. Like, doesn't really have anything that stands out to me. It's been quite a while since he's had a season where you're like, wow, this could be something. Like, I don't think he's ever had that kind of season, honestly. Like, he's never really panned out the way everyone thought he would. So to me, this is an innings coverage thing. The guy I'm more interested in is Vince Velasquez. Now, Vince Velasquez is 32, so he's a little bit older than Colby Allard, but he has had a past of some success. Always had a big arm. Teams really liked him. He was a prospect with Houston, traded to Philadelphia in a big trade. 2023, he was off to a really good start. He made 8 starts. His ERA was 3.86. He was clearing one of the lowest walk rates of his career, which was fantastic for him. Fastball velocity had maintained. Had Tommy John in the middle of 2023. Didn't sign anywhere in the last year, so he should be healthy going into the year. And, of course, Vince Velasquez, one of the things he does well, it's extension. He was in the 70th percentile in extension in 2023, and Cleveland is really high on these extension guys right now. Velasquez had a big arm. Always has had a good fastball. He's always had some good off-speed stuff. Like I said, he was really good in 2023 before he got hurt. So This should be an interesting one to see what he does. I would imagine they'll try to stretch him out as a starter in camp, but he's had a lot of injuries. He hasn't thrown over 100 innings since 2019. So be curious to see what the Guardians' role with him is going into spring training. I think it might be better off as a reliever, but I could see him giving him some depth in AAA. All right, let's talk about one more thing before we get out of here today, and that is other podcasts. So Stephen Kwan was on with Corey Kluber's podcast, Casa de Club. It was a good little podcast. Go check it out. It was a lot of fun. Even though Corey Kluber is just not one of those guys who I ever thought was really talkative, interesting guy to have a podcast. But he had a question about what to expect from the Guardians this year for Stephen Kwan. It was, what are the Guardians going to do this year? What do we expect from you? And he was just talking about how the Guardians have to be good fundamentally, and they've got to play hard and outwork everybody. He said they're going to have good pitching. And then he made some comments about how, they might make a move or two that, really surprises people, or you don't think about it off the top of your head as being a move that makes an impact, and then it does. And then you get to the end of the year and you think, wow, that wouldn't have happened without that move. And a lot of people took this as, oh, the Guardians are going to do something before spring training. They're going to make a move. The context of listening to that whole conversation to me, I think that was more of a, they might do something during the season, right? Like the Lane Thomas trade, or I'm talking about the trade deadline. Maybe they'll do something the next week or so. I don't know if they will. I doubt it. But I didn't take that conversation or Stephen Kwan's comments as necessarily anything that's going to happen. I think it was more of just what they do throughout the season. Maybe that was the Vince Velasquez or Colby Allard signings. I'm more likely Velasquez to me, but maybe that was it. Or maybe it's a trade during the season. And if it's a trade, I don't think it's a trade if there's anything being telegraphed here, because the Guardians are not discussing trades with Stephen Kwan in terms of other guys they're bringing in, because they aren't going to talk to current players about possible players they're trading unless they're like trying to vet character. So I doubt that's what's happening here. And they're really not supposed to comment on players and other teams too. It's also a violation. So I really doubt that's the case here. That kind of chatter doesn't really happen. If it's a free agent, maybe it's somebody that shares an agent with Kwan, if that's the case. And that's maybe how he might hear something that the Guardians could be working on. If they share an agent or something and he's hearing that, or just talking to someone about signing in Cleveland. But I didn't take that conversation as anything being imminent happening for the Guardians. I took that conversation as, maybe Vince Velasquez, or maybe it's a trade deadline trade or something, or in the season. I didn't take that as anything being imminent from Kwan. So we'll see. I really doubt it, but keep an eye on it, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. All right. Want to thank you for tuning in today. Make sure, again, you are subscribing on YouTube. We're trying to get to 4K. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't. We just had a recent one, but always love to get new ones. And then sign up to be a Locked On Guardians Insider. Like I said at the top of the show, bonus content. Once a month, we are giving you twice a month, we're giving you bonus episodes. One is just kind of a leftovers podcast, topics we don't get to, some deep cuts, some non-Guardians topics, just baseball in general. And then we're also doing a monthly subscriber mailbag too, with just the subscribers, no ads, all that kind of stuff. We can go as long as we want on those too. So, we'll take questions there. And then also, if you're not an insider subscriber, that's okay. You can email the show at loguardianshow@gmail.com. If you're not on social media, if you're not watching on YouTube and you want to get in touch with us, that's a good way to do it. And we also still have the listener survey in our description too. So if you want to take a listener survey and give us some feedback on how to shape the show, that is out there as well. Jeff will be here with you on Friday. I think he's going to talk some prospects as well. The rankings are out in a lot of different places. So I'm sure Jeff is going to address some prospect rankings in the Guardians on Friday's episode. So tune in for that. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for being an everydayer. Thank you for getting to the end of this podcast. Again, recommend to a friend if you can. And starting next week, we are back to 5 days a week with you, covering the Cleveland Guardians, your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Nobody else talking Guardians 5 days a week but Jeff and myself. So we'll be back next week for 5 days. Get ready for that. In the meantime, again, do all those. And in the meantime, go Guardians, go.